Thank you very much. And because the time is really strict, we decided to jump straight into the topic with Dimitar today. Just a brief idea, what we are researching together about is the protection of the offshore critical energy infrastructure in Europe in the aftermath of the Nord Stream explosions and the war in Ukraine. And we want to see who exactly has the right and the intention to defend and to protect. Is it the EU, is it NATO, or who else can do it? So, Dimitar.
Thank you. So the EU's energy security was put at high risk after the 24th of February 2022, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, energy supplies from the Russian Federation to the European Union were completely cut off in some cases, or partially cut off. Like the completely cut off, a good example of it are Bulgaria and Poland. But these worries, these insecurities in the EU reached a boiling point and like new qualitative point with the September 2022 sabotage of explosions of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that ran beneath the Baltic Sea and connected Russia to Germany. It is really interesting to note that an event on such a massive scale concerning international critical energy infrastructure had never happened before. But what do we talk about when we talk about critical energy infrastructure? Anyways, let's get the terminology out of the way. So the EU's definition of it is an asset or system which is essential for the maintenance of vital societal functions, health, safety, security, economic or well-being of people, and the disruption or destruction of which have a significant impact on at least 2 member states. It's important to mention here that there is national definitions of critical energy infrastructure, and there is a European one, and the European one, it mentions at least 2 member states, so this is important to know. And NATO's definition is a nation's infrastructure, assets, facilities, systems, networks, and processes that support the military, economic, political, and or social life on which a nation and or NATO depends. That's important. We're going to come back on that later. And when we talk about, just a second, I'm sorry. Oh, when we talk about offshore, what do we mean? Well, just a second. When we talk about offshore critical infrastructure, we mean critical energy infrastructure, which is situated in the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, or the continental shelf of a member state within the meaning of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Why is offshore critical energy infrastructure so relevant nowadays in the context of the war in Ukraine? Well, first of all, most of the gas and oil production, European production, takes place nowadays offshore in the seas and the oceans of the European Union. Also, 30% of all new wind installations are offshore, and more are going to deploy in the next year as a part of the green energy transition of the EU. But also very important, all the power that is produced offshore needs subsea cables in order to bring this energy onshore. And also all the islands of Europe, like Malta, for example, Cyprus, depend on these subsea submarine power cables. And also in the future, the EU plans to deploy even more offshore infrastructure, such as hydrogen, or we have new developments with tidal power, wave power, including here in Portugal. And what is the big difference? I don't know why we have this red sign here. We have a bug.
I'm sorry.
What's going on?
Yeah.
I think we have some trolls during our... I'm sorry. I'm going just to continue with this slide. So what is the difference between offshore and onshore energy? Well, offshore critical energy infrastructure is more difficult to protect because of its location. Most of the installations are located remotely in the deep sea, and because of geography, of course, and also because of meteorological conditions, they are more difficult to access in a timely manner, because time matters when we have to intervene. But also there is a different legal regime that is governing the structures. Dimitar already mentioned the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea. which makes it more ambiguous at times because it poses limits on who has the right to defend. How long can the army of a country, for example, go? Can it go beyond the territorial waters? Because most of these installations are located outside of the territorial waters. And this is a question for which we still do not have an answer within the EU. Who and when has the right to go and defend them?
Can we put the next slide? Yeah, thank you. But now we have a new threat landscape to critical energy infrastructure, which can come from physical threats, as the example given the Nord Stream 1 and 2 explosions. It can come from cyber threats stemming from the fact that critical energy infrastructure is becoming more and more digitalized, and from hybrid threats, which is both. And all of them were exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. But which are the actors on the scene? Well, we have the state and state-sponsored actors, like the state is obvious, but the state-sponsored ones. A good example could be the infamous Russian paramilitary-sponsored Wagner Group. We have transnational actors, which could be, well, we can give an example of terrorist organizations, and we have the private and non-private actors. It's interesting to underline that some of the European critical energy offshore infrastructure is owned by private companies, which sometimes are reluctant to share information with national governments or the EU on it.
And why we discuss about EU and NATO? I'm not sure how many of us are aware on the day-to-day basis that the military, the defense infrastructure completely depends on the civilian one. The army does not have its own energy infrastructure. An army does not own its own gas and oil or electricity networks. So if you can imagine, in a case of an imminent or recurring attack on the civilian infrastructure, also the army has to be impacted. And sometimes in an extreme scenario, of course, it can be rendered into incapacity to act, because imagine without electricity, it's very difficult to act in a timely manner. We can have, let's say, oil-based generators in a military camp, but they can last up to 48 hours, and not everything can be solved with the generators. And with it identified 4 main hotspots in the seas and the oceans of the EU: the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, and North Sea Atlantic zone. And very briefly, I'm going to tell you the challenges we identified, the threats and risks in each one of them. So the Baltic Sea has become notorious last year in September when the Nord Stream pipelines exploded. The explosion, interestingly, took place just a day before another pipeline, this time EU-supported, the Baltic pipe, was officially inaugurated. Now, this new pipe is bringing gas from Norway through Denmark to Poland, and in the near future to other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, like Slovakia or even Ukraine. And so it raises questions: which was the target? Was it Nord Stream? Was it the new pipeline? And also in the Baltic Sea, we have a specific situation. It's a very congested maritime space. There are many vessels, commercial vessels, military vessels, civilian vessels around, but also we have the legitimate presence of the Russian Navy due to its exclave of Kaliningrad. Russia has the right to be in the Baltic Sea as well. In the Black Sea, you cannot see the title here. Well, no needs to say more. We have an ongoing war. And you can see here on the map, just left west to the red area, it's the exclusive economic zone of Romania. Romania is the main producer of oil and gas in the Black Sea. And from next year is going to be the first producer of gas in the EU after Netherlands will drop its production. But these installations are located very close to the Crimean waters, which are now claimed by Russia, and also close to the war-affected areas at the Black Sea, really literally close, like within 50 miles. Also, now we have an issue in Romania and Bulgaria as well, a large number of dislocated underwater explosive devices, mines, that have reached the shores of Romania and Bulgaria. One of them even exploded in a resort in Romania. And also intense drone activity near the Black Sea shores and at the Danube's mouth. You all heard about the grain deal, about the issue of Ukraine being impeded by Russia to export its grain. This is where the activity takes place nowadays. And of course, there is an intense naval presence of warships and auxiliary military vessels due to the war. But also under the Black Sea, we have a very important pipeline, the Turkish Stream, which is a gas pipeline bringing gas from Russia under the Black Sea to Turkey and further on to other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, like Bulgaria or Serbia. It's an important supply mean for these countries. You can imagine that it's raising question about its vulnerability to the military activity in the area. In Mediterranean Sea, it's not simpler as a case. Again, you cannot see the title, I'm sorry for that. In the last year, since 2018, Cyprus discovered natural gas around its southern coast, but Turkey claims some of the Cypriot gas fields. It's interesting because Turkey is one of the 5 countries which did not sign or ratify the United Nations Conventions for the Law of the Sea, which means that it has a different interpretation on the Law of the Sea. Turkey does not recognize Cyprus' rights to have exclusive economic zone. And also it claims a part of these fields on behalf of its protege, which is the unrecognized Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. I'm not sure if you know the reality of the conflict, which is the oldest conflict we have in the EU since 1974. The northern part of the Republic of Cyprus is claimed by the Republic of Northern Cyprus. And with this gas, the EU has made big plans. It intends to build a gas pipeline, EastMed project, that will bring Cypriot gas to Greece and Italy. Is going to be the most expensive and lengthiest pipeline in history and in the world. It raises a lot of questions about its feasibility, because if you can imagine, if it's so expensive, the gas is going to be expensive as well. Will it be competitive on the market? It's more feasible probably for Cyprus to send the gas via pipeline to Israel than to Europe, to the EU. And the last hot area that we have, it's the North Sea Atlantic zone. Well, this is the most peaceful, let's say, most cooperative and most advanced offshore energy producer part of Europe. Most of the offshore production in Europe takes place here, be it gas, oil, or renewables. But also here we have repeated reports from Denmark, from Norway, from Sweden about suspicious activity of potential espionage activity by Russian ships. Here you can see where they have been spotted, mainly in the vicinity of the wind farms, of the offshore wind farms. And also there's a passage of Russian warships carrying weapons in the Atlantic. Actually, they pass quite frequently close to the Portuguese shores. And it is important to have this area to be safe, to be secure as well, because it is the main offshore producer, as I was saying, in the EU.
But where do the EU and NATO overlap as energy security providers on the old continent? Well, it's a long story, but the EU has been preoccupied with energy security since the Single European Act of 1986. But the worries were accelerated in 2014 because of the Russian annexation of Crimea, and even more exacerbated in 2022, as already mentioned. NATO, on the other hand, has a relatively recent interest in energy security, coming from the ascension of the former communist bloc countries into the alliance in the mid-2000s. The thing is that they had an inherent fear, these former communist bloc countries, they had an inherent fear of Russia and were extremely dependent on Russian energy supplies, and they projected these fears into the alliance. But it should be said that the EU focuses more on non-military aspects of energy security, or security of supply, as it is known. It's a synonym. But it recently got concerned with implications for the defense sector through the European Defense Agency. NATO, on the other hand, is all about the military aspect of energy security. For the alliance, energy security is about sustainable energy supplies to the military and national support for authorities. Since the war in Ukraine, energy security and the protection of critical energy infrastructure found their place in NATO's strategic compass, its Madrid summit communique last year, and this year's Vilnius summit communique.
And to almost reach our conclusions, so what we have identified so far, our research is still ongoing, is that there is a mismatch between narratives and practice, both for the EU and for NATO. There is a sort of a dissonance, if you want, in the two big actors, in the sense that both of them claim a stronger role as energy security providers in Europe. And EU, a traditional market-oriented player, now it adopted a more geopolitical and defense-oriented approach to energy security in the past years. It claims a stronger geopolitical role for itself. NATO, as a military alliance, surprisingly introduced energy security on its agenda. Energy security used to be more a trade issue. So we're thinking, can we even discuss about the militarization of energy security? On the other hand, we noticed that when Nord Stream explosions occurred, there was confusion about who has the right to intervene. Denmark didn't know if it's them or Poland. Within Denmark, they didn't know, is it the police, is it the Coast Guard, is it the military? And also there is ambiguity in the international law with respect to the right to defend the infrastructure outside of territorial waters. As I was saying, the Convention of the UN is still not clear enough about it. And we notice that there is a lack of capacity and mandate on the EU level. As we all know, the EU does not have an army of its own, but also lack of clarity of what NATO really wants, of how much is willing to do, and as well as mandate, because not all of the countries are NATO members, like Cyprus, for example. And this is the end of our presentation. I hope we managed to respect the time. We're running a bit fast. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions.